Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon. I'm Christian Osterman. I direct the Center's European Studies program here. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion on Europe and Iran's nuclear ambitions. This session, as you might have gathered from the flyers outside, is part of the Center's first Ahtisaari Symposium on European Security and International Perspective. It honors former Finnish President and Nobel laureate Martti Ahtisaari, and we have the great honor and privilege to have him with us here today. The symposium is being organized in cooperation with Aalto University and with support from the Rihi Foundation. I apologize for the pronunciation. Dr. Kanninen is here representing the foundation. We're delighted to have all of you with us today for this panel discussion. President Ahtisaari talked this morning about the broader ramifications of the Middle East for European security. This afternoon we will talk about one of the most pressing issues for European and American security, the Iranian nuclear program. Rather than giving you a long introduction, let me introduce briefly our three experts, distinguished experts that we have here today to talk about the challenge that the Iranian nuclear program poses for the EU. To my immediate right is His Excellency Klaus Scharioth. He's the ambassador, of course, of the Federal Republic of Germany to the United States. He presented his credentials to President George Bush on March 13, 2006. So he's here in his fourth year. Ambassador Scharioth was born in 1946 in Essen, North Rhine-Westphalia, studied law in Bonn, Freiburg, and Geneva, and is also a graduate of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where he studied international relations, international law, and economics, and received his PhD. He entered the Foreign Service in 1976 and was political director and before serving as State Secretary of the German Foreign Office from 2002 onwards until he became ambassador here in Washington. To his right is Dr. Shahram Chubin, who is currently a Woodrow Wilson Center public policy scholar and a non-resident senior associate with the Carnegie Endowment. His research focuses on non-proliferation, terrorism, and Middle East security issues. Dr. Chubin was Director of Studies at the Geneva Center for Security Policy in Switzerland from 1996 to 2009. He has been a consultant for the U.S. Defense Department, the RAND Corporation, and the United Nations, and has published widely in major journals. I won't list all of them here and now. Finally, from Paris, all the way on the right side is Dr. Bernard Hourcade, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Paris and a specialist on Iranian politics. He received his doctorate in geography from the University of Paris-Sorbonne and was director of the French Institute for Iranian Studies in Tehran from 1978 to 1993. Dr. Hourcade is a member of several scientific and editorial boards, including Iranian Studies, New York, Iranian Journal of Geopolitics, Tehran, and the Geographical Research Quarterly. He is also published widely on Iran and Iranian politics, and given that his focus is really on the domestic internal developments, we'll start off with him. I've asked the panelists to limit their remarks to about 20-25 minutes so that we have time in the second half of this session to get to a discussion with all of you. Thank you for joining us, and Dr. Hourcade, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here and to share with you the experience I have of these years of social research in Iran during the last 40 years. It is also a privilege to be here in Washington, D.C. to meet friends and to meet people dealing with Iran, making research on Iran, to exchange views. Since this country is so controversial the most important thing is to exchange views, since nobody, I think, has got 100% of the truth in his own mind. I would like not exactly to speak this afternoon on the nuclear issue exactly, but the paper could be entitled The Race Between Democracy and the Bomb. Last June, a bomb exploded in Iran, not a nuclear explosion, but a much more powerful bomb, a democratic one, with millions of people finding the nerve to demonstrate in the streets of Tehran in demand for liberty and access to the 21st century. Today, Iran is not a democratic political system, of course, but obviously Iranians have shown they are already true republicans to people having a democratic capacity, if not a nuclear capacity. This is a new parameter to be taken into consideration in the international political agenda concerning Iran. The nuclear issue is no longer alone at the front page of the media. How can we impose today economic sanctions on the Islamic regime to make it abandon its nuclear program and to support at the same time the struggle of the people of Iran? In this respect, I would like to share with you some consideration about the linkage between democracy and the bomb, about the US policy of engagement and the European policy in this field, and the third point, about the prospects of strengthening democratic dynamics inside Iran, to conclude with a tale by Jean de La Fontaine. The linkage between nuclear and political issues is not a novelty, since strategies toward the regime change in Iran through a revolution, a coup d'etat, or a military action have been envisaged for a long period of time as possible ways to solve the nuclear crisis. Today, the linkage between the nuclear question and politics appears different, since there is now in Iran a strong, sustainable, popular, complex political opposition, which seems to be the basement of any democratic move in this country. We have also to take into account the fact that Mr. Hossein Mousavi and the leaders of the Green Movement are the founders of the Islamic Republic and the founders of the nuclear policy of Iran. So the linkage between politics and the bomb is clear. The question of regime change has not to be seen in a complete different in a complete different perspective, since the balance of power inside the country has changed now. Iran is an emerging state, as Brazil, and no matter its regime will be, Iran has got today the scientific and technological capacity of making a nuclear weapon in one day or the other. That's a matter of fact. I will start for this first hypothesis. Second point, Iran has also the cultural and political capacity of becoming a sustainable democratic country. We have got these two capacities, nuclear and democratic, at the same time. In such conditions, the only realistic way to control the future unavoidable nuclear capacity of Iran is to encourage at the same time a sustainable democratic state, like Japan or Germany. A country fully involved in international economic relations is the best and only way to have a peaceful use of nuclear capacity when Iran will have this capacity. The Shah used to speak about Iran as the Japan of the Middle East. The challenge could be put again on the agenda. In such conditions, a new situation to face is the race between democracy and the bomb. Since containing the nuclear program and rapid regime change have already failed, a new policy could be strengthened to find a sustainable democratic state in Iran. This is not a dovish thing. This is not wishful thinking, but just an effort to think different in order to be efficient and active and to find short-term conclusion after 30 years of failure. Today, the Islamic Republic of Iran is governed by the harshest rulers in 30 years. And in spite of UN Security Council sanctions, the country is able to enrich large quantity of uranium. So sanctions have failed. We have to think different. In this respect, I would like to see what was done by the US recently, and to speak about the double effect of the new engagement policy of the US. My opinion could be seen as politically incorrect. I agree with that. But regarding Iran, the first step of the new policy of President Obama seems to me an outstanding success. The New Year greetings of March 2009 to the Iranian nation, using the word respect, and followed by the speech of Cairo on the Muslim world, destroyed the main ideological pillar of the Islamic Republic. Down with the US is over. And so, with this withdrawal of these ideological sanctions against Iran, has two immediate consequences on the Islamic regime. It was a tougher sanctions against Iran after 30 years. First, all political sanctions in Iran, from reformist to conservative, were immediately and deeply upset, disappointed, divided about the way to respond to this overture. The result was a tough competition for the presidential elections in June. Usually, in the election, the person elected was just a way to be legitimized as a president. Now, for the first time, something was at stake in the elections. And so, there is no longer any consensus in Iran, and the Islamic regime is weakened. The guide himself is considered as a dictator by the founders of the Islamic regime. The Islamic regime founded by Khomeini is now destroyed by the speech of President Obama to the Iranian nation. That's the first consequence. Second one is that the people of Iran have decided with great courage to demonstrate their demand of liberty and normalization. They can do so because the US is, for the first time, open to the debate and respect the political identity of Iran. An outcome is now possible for the Iranian political system, Islamist or not Islamist. It was not possible before. All the openings made by the US policy in the time of Clinton and even the time of the Bush were just short-term policies, and now if something sustainable and a long-range time is proposed, a new opening is possible for the people. In this condition, in 1977, a similar popular uprising occurred, and it was the election of Mohammad Khatami. But this weak and popular reformist leader had to face at the same time two opposition. One internal opposition by the conservative, and above all, at the same time, an external opposition from the US. It was a time of regime change, of dual containment, of rogue state, and so on and so forth. And so the democratic people in Iran, the democratic forces, couldn't be strong enough because they were facing two large opponents inside and outside. And for the first time now, the outside opponents decided not to be at war with Iran. That's a major issue. Today, the US policy of engagement is efficient because it is founded on a new balance of power in Iran. Nobody in Iran wants to pay today the price of a new revolution with a regime change obtained through a coup d'etat, hard coup d'etat or soft coup d'etat, or military operation, bringing to power unknown people from outside. They do know what happened in 1979 when Khomeini came to power. They do know what happened in Iraq in 2003 or in Afghanistan with the coming back of Hamid Karzai, people coming from outside. A regime change is easy to carry out, but a sustainable, reliable democratic regime must come from inside of the country, and it is the only way to be sustainable. It may take more time, of course, but it is the only possible method considering global development, as was the case for Germany with the making of the European Union after the Second World War. The nationalist movement of Iran, of Iranian politics, had joined the Islamist factions in 1979 to overthrow the Shah and the pro-Western power of the country. Now, since the US policy is supposed to respect the Iranian identity, those nationalists can very well abandon the Islamists and join the international. And so, in the pro-opening and pro-globalization people and component of the Iranian population. This shift of the nationalists from Islamism to globalization was made possible by Barack Obama's new policy, but this surge was not so strong and so strong enough last June to overthrow Ahmadinejad. It was just the starting point of it, not achievement for that. And the question is that after the speech, there was not a second speech, and there was not a surge towards the same direction. Today, the necessary coalition of the divided opposition forces is not yet implemented. We witnessed a social protest in Iran, not a political opposition yet. Nobody in Tehran has got the power to take any decision. Even the guide himself is not able to take a decision. Even Ahmadinejad alone is not able to take a decision. Even the Pasdaran alone are not able to do so. The unity of the regime is only achieved around a limited consensus, chiefly on repression against the opponent. This is anarchy. This is not the chaos, but anarchy, at least in Iran. The Islamic regime, feels in danger, facing the desertion of the nationalist forces, which were their own allies, and now are going towards globalization. This policy change is in the making. But it needs, of course, some time to be consolidated, and it could stop at any time if the USA are abandoning its new policy of engagement and return to the good old sanctions and embargo and military threats that would push back the nationalists into the arms of the Islamists. Following the political coup d'etat of Nowruz, the technical agreement of the nuclear research reactor of Tehran in October 2009 was also a very positive action. It proves evidence that Ahmadinejad, implementing a Chinese political model of internal containment, a tactical, limited international opening. Ahmadinejad was unable to impose his decision to the guide, and nobody else is able to take a decision about the nuclear policy of the US. The US-Russian proposal to enrich uranium outside Iran made the division inside the regime very worse and open, as the speech of Nowruz did for the political issue. And so, in March 1st, and secondly in October, the two surge of the US government towards Iran had provoked strong division inside the country. The Iranian regime, Islamic regime, is weakened. 1 year of US non-interference in Iranian affairs had obviously deeper and more sustainable effects than 30 years of embargo, containment, and sanctions. Of course, difficulties, problems, mistakes remain. Iran has not become a democratic state, that's obvious, just because the demonstration of the green in the street were not strong enough. And of course, we know that the nuclear capacity of Iran is increasing and improving every day. In spite of some rapprochement with Russia, the US policy seems to be isolated, because the European Union at the same time was not so active in the last years. And of course, we had on that time critical dialogue opposed to dual containment. But this time, I think there is no linkage, no cooperation, no political cooperation, no like-minded policy between Europe and the US toward that. We know that today France especially is having a tough policy towards Iran with sanctions when the US is trying to have a new overture. The second point is the social and political change in Iran and the role of economics to strengthen this change. Social and cultural change occurred during the last 3 decades in Iran, and this is well known and acknowledged. The evolution of the villages and small towns was even more rapid than in the large cities. Most Iranians have a good knowledge of the way of thinking and the way of life of the outside world, especially of the Western world, through education, radio, TV, and internet. But this opening is mainly virtual, potential. These people in Iran have not the experience of the West. They've got a knowledge of the West. And between knowledge and experience, there is a huge gap. This opening, so, is weak because it is not based on experience on economic relation. After years of embargo and sanction, the number of foreign companies working in Iran is very limited. No more than 2,000 or 3,000 Westerners are living in Iran. 2,000, 3,000, including the families, the kids, the children, the diplomats. It means nobody in a country of 75 million inhabitants open to international culture and having relations through education and internet with the West. In spite of the large Iranian diaspora, the Iranian society has not the experience of globalization. There was the knowledge of it, not the experience of it. Iran is an underdeveloped country where today the main exported goods, oil included, are pistachio and carpets, exactly as it was in the 16th century. Iran is exported 4% of the exports are industrial products. Turkey, 83%. Iran is a remote, underdeveloped, abandoned, isolated country. And so, is it possible for a society in the making, wanting to join globalization, having no experience of what is the current economy of the world? The situation of economic isolation makes any sustainable political opening impossible and gives the most conservative factions of the Islamic Republic all the facilities to control the society. The economic sanctions about nuclear activities have perhaps been efficient to slow down these dangerous programs, that's clear. But they have clearly also isolated the Iranian population from the rest of the world and from the dynamics of democracy. The guide Ali Khamenei is right when he says that the cultural aggression of the West is more dangerous than the military attack. In this respect, I do believe that the toughest sanction against the conservative factions of the Islamic Republic of Iran, or against the Islamic Republic, would be the withdrawal of the sanctions. If international companies and organizations are back again in Iran for peaceful development, this will give a new and old generation of Iranians the opportunity to meet real people from outside, to take part in the globalization, including human rights, freedom, and political opening, an intolerable challenge for the conservative factions. If the embargoes on oil and gas investments, on airplanes, or in cultural products are lifted, as it was recently done, I think, by the State Department in the US, lifting sanctions on Apple and on computers, this would be a support for the regime. This would not be a support for the regime, but an help for the population looking for the job, for safety in air travels, and for international culture. Of course, such a policy of positive sanction is not easy to implement, that's clear, by policymakers and lobbies used to the old diplomatic and legal struggles for sanctions. The European Union, with its industrial companies that work in Iran for a long time, and the experience of dealing with Iranians, could be very helpful in the first step of such a new policy of engagement in economy with Iran. Some think tanks in Europe are now thinking that the only way to put pressure on the conservative in Tehran is to intensify the relation with Iran in all fields, sharing the experience and dealing with economy. We have to meet Iranian people, not through internet and on the culture and phone call and emails, but through economic activities, through social relation. When we cannot help a friend getting drawn by sending him an email to help him, we have to take his hand. We have to meet Iranians, that's important. We can reach a winner-winner solution and give democracy a chance to be strong enough before Iranian engineers will be able to make a nuclear weapon. That's a race between democracy, the capacity of a country to take a decision and to have international relations, as Germany has. And we have to think about what was done about Germany in Europe in the 20th century. After the First World War, there was sanctions against Germany that they have to pay money for the French especially. The consequences was Hitler. After the Second World War, a new policy of engagement, building Europe, including Germany inside Europe, and the result, we know what it is today. Is it a dovish or naive dream for Iran, or realistic policy? I would like to conclude with this race between democracy and the bomb, and maybe learning from the tale of the hare and the tortoise by Jean de La Fontaine, the French writer of the 17th century. Changing the Iranian regime from outside is impossible and not sustainable. Attempts to stop the Iranian nuclear weapon program failed. Let us be realistic and efficient. Iran and international security deserved it. The Iranians have shown again last year that they have the capacity to build up a political system of their own as long as their opponents are not supported from outside. The question is not to support the democratic movement in Iran or the Greens or any other faction, but to let them free to stop and stop supporting the de facto conservative opponents we are supporting. We all want Iran to be a democratic state, open to the West, open to the international community, in a sustainable, strong way. Within or outside the Islamic Republic, it's not our problem. In the meantime, the nuclear program seems to run faster, of course. But let us learn about La Fontaine in his tale, The Hare and the Tortoise. The nuke is a hare, going fast because of the support of the Iranian state and paradoxically of the international community shouting at him and challenging him by provocative actions. The hare is proud and pretentious and is not able to understand where is the best way to win lies. The tortoise, on the contrary, is the Iranian democratic system. It's going slowly but steadily. The conservative Iranian faction tried to push him out of the way, but it always returns on the track. The Westerners, on their side, mock its effort, denying him food, even adding burdens on its back. Some of the Western countries do not trust in its capacity and would like to use another animal from abroad to presumably apt more than it is to run faster. The tortoise of democracy is going slowly, but as fast as it possibly can. The tortoise rushes slowly, but according to the tale by Jean de La Fontaine, at the end of the day, the winner is the tortoise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, you may speak from your desk.
Comfortable. Thank you. I totally agree with Bernard that engagement with Iran is the best hope for regime evolution amounting to regime change. The real question is, how do you get there if one side isn't willing to engage? Now, I'm going to make a set of schematic comments. There's not going to be a lot of coherence or a particular theme about the subject. And I think that perhaps in the ambassadors that will pick it up from his own experience, and your questions will take it to a different level. First, it's obvious to me that the Middle East is the only part of what used to be called the Third World that is contiguous to Europe. It's also the case that Europe has a large Muslim population, which means that Middle East issues, be they Gaza or any other issue, are effectively domestic political issues in Europe. There is, in a sense, an organic relationship between Europe and the Middle East, which is not present between the United States and the Middle East. And thirdly, of course, missile proliferation and missile ranges are shortening, bringing Europe and the Middle East closer together. Having said that, obviously Europe has had much closer relationship with Iran, not just geographically, but historically. There's been interaction. And the Europeans have been more willing to try diplomacy, in a sense been more forgiving, more fatalistic, more pragmatic, and look to things like the critical dialogue that Bernard mentioned in the 1980s to see if they could give a channel to the Islamic Republic to normalize itself. Now, of course, the nuclear issue has raised the stakes since mid-2002. And this gave an opportunity for the EU in two respects. The EU3, I should say, but the EU, let's say, because Solana came along as well. One, it was an opportunity and a necessity to try and prevent another Iraq. That is, the US moving by itself or dividing with Europe, or many European countries. And the other was an opportunity to put into practice the newly formulated, literally newly formulated European security doctrine. And that European security doctrine that came out, I think, in 2003, maybe in 2002, was very close to the American European security doctrine in relation to proliferation and terrorism and so on, and the implications of that. And the three major European powers did, I think, a very commendable job with the High Representative of trying to feel out whether there was any scope for some sort of settlement, some sort of mutual reassurance with the Khatami regime. Now, it gave, if you like, Iran an opportunity to practice diplomacy rather than the United States to target Iran as the next Iraq. And that worked, I think, pretty well until in the sense that there was some diplomacy, there was some feeling out. But by 2005, the hardliners in Iran, actually by 2004, the hardliners in Iran had taken over first the Majlis and then the presidency. And then they pursued a policy not of confidence building, which was with the intention of this diplomacy, but in fact provocation and confrontation. The problem is, of course, that Iran has treated the EU and the EU3 by extension rather the same way as Russia and China treats the EU. And I don't have to go much further than that. They seek to divide the Europeans from the US. They try and play on divisions within Europe, or create divisions if there aren't any. They try and dangle trade deals. They promise to threaten retaliation for sanctions against particular countries commercially. They suggest they have a policy option of looking east toward China. And they exploit the lax law enforcement of the sanctions and the inherent difficulty of dual technologies and so on. The Iranian tactics have generally, I think, not been effective, though the European states, and especially the southern ones, I mean Italy and Spain and so on, are perhaps somewhat less determined to see this issue as an international security issue, as the major powers, Russia, Europe, major powers, France, Germany and Britain, I think, who've been rather solid on this. However, that said, the Europeans clearly have less faith in sanctions being effective. First, of course, they prefer, whether it's the governments or the major corporations, not to lose markets to China or to each other. And they're also dubious about watertight sanctions, as we saw over the weekend in the expose in the New York Times, even with determination. It seems that sanctions, even in this country, after all these years, are not really effective, or not been effectively implemented. They're skeptical about sanctions enforcement, and they're skeptical about US foreign subsidiaries, even though the EU has passed a system for regulating export of dual-use items. But there are, of course, no enforcement mechanisms on sanctions. Are the Europeans more sanguine about a nuclear Iran? I think the answer is emphatically no, especially the three major European countries. They don't especially want to live with an Iran that has missiles and nuclear weapons, and Iran's missiles will soon cover most of Europe. But the Europeans are probably more used to recognizing that some problems resist solutions, and that managing them may be the best that can be hoped for. This is not a recipe, I think, for surrender or laxness or an argument against sanctions, but a recognition of a probability, a reality, that simply put, that this is an issue that will be determined elsewhere. Now let me come back and circle a couple of these points. First, we've seen the limits to diplomacy and confidence building. It may be, as Bernard says, that unilateral concessions by the United States would be useful in some domains to engage some of the Iranian population. But whether the Iranian government is quite aware, as Khamenei has said, that globalization and engagement is a slippery slope to the doom of the regime, it's hard to see how far diplomacy can go. Secondly, sanctions are an unattractive option among less attractive options. That is to say, it's perhaps less unattractive than the alternatives. The severity of sanctions, as we all know, is such, and we're seeing it unfold as we speak, is such that you need depth and breadth, and you have to trade off one against the other. That is, to get the others on board in the UN, you have to water it down. But that doesn't mean that you can't use the UN sanctions, however watered down, to move forward on much stricter sanctions among like-minded coalitions. Even major governments, I'm thinking of the Federal Republic and giving the opportunity for our third speaker to rebut this, have consistently at the top levels of government supported sanctions if the alternatives are seen very clearly. The problem is, of course, that the federal government is a federal government. It's also a coalition government. They're also it's an exporting country. And the inherent problems of regulating exports when they're dual use, and these questions that I mentioned earlier about if we do it completely, will we lose the market to somebody else? etc. All of these tend to water down how much you can do. I only mention the federal government because it's, in a sense, the most important country, particularly in terms of trade with Iran, has been, especially in relation to the technologies we're talking about. Second point, I think, is that the EU's ambitions as a strategic actor since 2003 have diminished. Here I would just put on the table the fact that I don't think, I think that on a number of security issues, perhaps Georgia being one, perhaps on energy security being another, but certainly in relation to the economic crisis, there's been a sort of renationalization in Europe. And at the same time, the election, it seems to me, the recent election of these two officials for these rather serious positions reflect an alarming, in my view, or maybe just a normal lack of ambition that I think is striking. In any case, the European states are not the major actors in this issue, and nor are they the principal prize. Unlike the quartet in the Middle East, where the EU has been active and has paid for a great deal, the checkbook doesn't come up in the question, in this nuclear question with Iran. Really, the prize and the issue is the relationship between the United States and Iran, and by extension, the sort of Iran that behaves itself properly in the region. In general, the European states, and Bernard alluded to this because his country is the prime example of it. Some European states, the European states have supported American diplomacy, even to the extent of supporting the suggestion last autumn of a fuel swap, which was to buy time. But it is interesting that, in fact, some of them, France especially, are even more hardline than the United States, by which I mean they adhere to the United Nations Security Council resolutions that there should be no enrichment. Or put it this way, a precondition for discussions should be cessation or freeze on enrichment, whereas the Americans, by implication, under Obama, have moved beyond that, or backwards, if you like, maybe not forwards. But in any case, it is interesting that some European countries, there should be even more hardline than the US on this, France especially. Now, what can Europe add? Well, obviously, they can increase the impact of sanctions and add their own stronger sanctions. They can broaden support and the legitimacy for sanctions and follow it up seriously. They can reinforce the US case that the issue of a nuclear Iran is one of international concern, not a bilateral one, not a vendetta between Washington and Tehran, but a serious issue that affects the region and, by extension, Europe, that it affects regional order and stability and the integrity of the NPT as a global regime. It can do all of those things, and it can offer, as President Ahtisaari suggested in a roundabout way, or I take it from what he was suggesting, it could offer perhaps things like good offices for an all-inclusive regional arrangement at some point down the road, Helsinki process. But what Europe cannot do is substitute for the US in providing security guarantees for the regional states, assurances, or provide an alternative route to settlement of this issue. It can and has played a complementary role despite its misgivings.
Thank you, Shahram. Ambassador. And if I may ask, Ambassador's asked that his remarks be off the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me think what I could add to those two excellent contributions already. There is some. And I will now speak from the perspective of someone who was part of these negotiations from the very beginning. And let me just recall, because I think it adds to some of the things you have said, let me recall why we did it and what we tried to do. It was the late spring, early summer of 2003, and we had the feeling that the real problem in the Mideast area was not Iraq, but A, Israel-Palestine, and B, Iran. And therefore, we got together with our friends from France and from the UK because we figured that none of our three countries alone would have much of an impact. And we got together and we talked to the Iranians and we told them, of course, you have the right to go for civil nuclear use. That's uncontested. But what we don't like is that you seem to be engaging in things which are not really necessary if you just go for civil nuclear power. And we were talking about three things which we didn't like. We were talking about reprocessing, which you don't need if you just go for civil nuclear power, and enrichment. And we said to the Iranians, you have a choice. One choice is that you first suspend and then later on forgo enrichment and reprocessing, and that you also sign the additional protocol which would allow monitors of the IAEA into your country so that you would regain credibility, which you unfortunately have lost. If you do that, we would help to modernize your country and we would engage with you. You would have the benefit of more modern technologies, and we would also continue the negotiations on the European cooperation agreement. We knew that the Iranians were eager for that conclusion, and we stopped negotiations for the time being. We did send our three foreign ministers to Tehran. That was October 2003. And they did reach a success. They could get from the Iranians the three things which I mentioned. They suspended enrichment. They suspended also reprocessing. And they agreed to sign the additional protocol, and they allowed a bit later monitors from the IAEA into their country. Why did we do that? I mean, why did we in the first place talk with Iran? Because we were concerned that if Iran would acquire a nuclear weapon and would acquire the missile technology which goes with it, we were absolutely certain that this would create an arms race in the region, and it would not stop with Iran. Other countries would also pretty much at the same time would also go nuclear, and we thought that was not in the German interest, not in the British interest, not in the French interest. We had also another reason. We also had the reason that we believe that now these days we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the NPT, and we refer to it. We had the feeling that this would be further eroded if we wouldn't do something here about Iran, about the possibility that Iran would acquire nuclear weapons. On the other hand, we also figured in the summer of 2003 that, and this is a strange dichotomy, almost a dilemma, we thought that with the exception of Israel, there was probably no other country in the region which had such modernizing potential as Iran. You had a very high proportion of the population going to university. You had a very high proportion of those students being female, much higher than in all other countries in the region. And so we thought that the possibility of change was there, change from within, but we were not sure how long it would take, because those people I refer to were mostly young people, and in Iran you have a society where the older people are definitely having the power. So that's what we did, and those were the reasons. And I must say, for almost 2 years it worked. For almost 2 years we had the suspension of those two things. We had the monitors in the country. Then Shahram alluded to it. We got a change of government, in Iran, we might also have not as good a package as we should have in the spring of 2005. That's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking, of course, for my government here. That's why it's good that you said we are off the record. But in the end, in the summer of 2005, the suspension ended. And the good thing is that now the United States, which had been very hesitant concerning this activity of the EU3, they came on board. They already had changed their position slightly in early 2005. And in May 2006, they decided to fully support our initiative. And ever since, it's basically no longer EU3, but it's the EU plus US. And we then also got Russia and China very interested. Now, I will skip a few years. I will just say we welcome very much that the new US administration has intensified these efforts, because I share your slightly skeptical assessment of the possibilities of Europe in the long run there. I think we are not the big gorilla in the room, and we just alone can't swing that. I think it was good that we started it in 2003, but now I think we need everybody united. We need the United States on board, which we have, with this new approach of direct engagement, and we also need Russia and China on board. This really, I believe, that the United States has now fully come on board, really has helped, and I believe that we have opportunity to have an impact here together, the six of us, the three Europeans, the EU, United States, Russia and China, that we didn't have before. Now, you know that so far Iran has not accepted the offer of direct engagement, and that's why, and there I have a slight difference to Bernard, that's why we believe you can't really say now you don't accept our offers now. That doesn't make any difference. We believe that the time has come for targeted sanctions. I say targeted sanctions because this makes all the difference. You have to, whenever you think about sanctions, you have to devise sanctions which do what you want. And in this case, you don't want to hurt the middle class. You don't want to hurt those who are behind the Green Movement, who protested in June 2009, and who are the opposition, and that is basically the middle class. So you don't want to hurt them. You want to hurt, first of all, anyone who has to do with the nuclear program, first. Second, you want to hurt anyone who does anything with arms. I mean, any kind of arms, I think we should no longer provide to Iran, whatever the arms are, big, small, important, unimportant. And third, I think we should try to affect those who are the backbone of the regime, and that is the Revolutionary Guards. And therefore, we should go there not only for nuclear aspects and armaments aspect, but also for economic aspects, and try to hit companies which are held by the Revolutionary Guards, but also firms which are officially held by others and only unofficially held by the Revolutionary Guards. That's what we suggest. I think we have very good consultations right now in New York. We are really seeing here eye to eye, and I'm quite confident that we will get that. You referred to the fact that that to the special role of Germany. And let me say a few words to that. I think that we have in this group of six, that we have Germany in there, is important for two reasons. It is first important for the reason that the other five are the five permanent members of the Security Council and nuclear weapon countries. And in my talks with the Iranian negotiators, they always said, this is unfair, what's happening. And unfortunately, they got some currency in non-aligned countries with that. It's unfair. The nuclear weapon countries, they want to sit on their nuclear weapons, and they want to prevent us from being equal. They want us from acquiring what they already have, you say. I mean, they are beginning to disarm. Of course, I must concede that the failure of the NPT Review Conference in 2005 was a big setback for all of us, and I think it encouraged people in Iran to take a tougher role. So that's why we believe we cannot afford to have an unsuccessful NPT Review Conference in May of this year. It has to be a success. But we could say to the other non-aligned countries, you see, we are on your side. We are also have-nots. And as a have-not, you have a good life, and it's really not a question of the haves against the have-nots. It's a question of those who have lost their credibility, Iran, and those who have disregarded also Security Council resolutions. The second reason why it's important, and you also alluded to that Germany is part of the group, is that we have 130 years of pretty good relations. We had, it was for many Iranian families, it was a tradition that they would send their kids to university in Germany. And so we have a strong group of people in Iran who got their education in Germany. Of course, you have that also here in the United States. But I think it does play a role. And therefore, when Germany really begins to convince their companies to withdraw from Iran, that really does have an effect, because we, in those 130 years, have built up a pretty strong position there. And if we say, Deutsche Bank, you better get out there, or when we say Siemens, we would recommend that you leave, or when we say Volkswagen, don't build an assembly plant there, that really hurts. It really hurts the Iranians, because it does make a difference. And we have, for instance, reduced the amount of export credit guarantees from the good old days. In 2004, we had 2 billion in that year, and we've reduced it to last year to 68 million. That is about 3% of what we had. So we reduced it by 97%. And that hurts. And that does make a difference. One last comment for the future. I very much agree with what you said, that we need the United States for any package which is attractive enough for Iran to accept it. It will have to do with security guarantees, I believe. I think it also has to do with the question of the multilateralization of the fuel cycle. I believe there will be no other solution than without that. I don't think there is a solution. And I believe for all of that, we need the United States. This, I think, is really a case where only if the United States and Europe work together do we have a chance of success. And I believe that this proposal of the Tehran research reactor, which was made this late spring, early summer, I think almost got us where we wanted to be, because in the first reaction, the Iranians loved it. And they liked it, and they took it. And on October 1st, I believe it was, they signaled that they would accept it. And it took them 4 weeks then to get out of this acceptance. I think this is the way in which we should think. And this is the way we should do. We should now have these targeted sanctions, but we should keep our hand stretched out. We should be ready to engage directly whenever the Iranians are ready to do so. One last comment, because it's so talked much about here in this city. I do not believe that you can provoke change, regime change in a society from the outside. And I think that's a very important point. I believe whenever you try that, it's counterproductive. Change has to come from within, has to come from the inside. I think we all learned that in the Cold War, when the real change came in 1989 from the inside. It came because in Czechoslovakia you had Charter 77, In Poland, you had Solidarność. In East Germany, you had people who were courageous enough to take to the streets. But if they would have had the, so to speak, had been installed by us in the West, they would have lost their credibility and they would not have been able to bring down the Berlin Wall as they did in November '89. So I think this is a very important question. We believe there is a good chance to get change in Iran. What we also believe, it would be totally counterproductive to try to get it from the outside. It would actually mean that those people who are about to get change, that they would lose their image of being patriots, and they would lose their image of being good Iranians, and that, I think, would lead to their defeat. Thanks.
Very few people think that sanctions can accomplish anything. So leave aside from the question of whether you could devise sanctions that could be as targeted as you suggested, Mr. Ambassador. Let's suppose you could do that. Could you then describe for me the mechanism by which that would then accomplish something, that the Revolutionary Guard would say, we feel really sanctioned, so they would what? Go to Khamenei and say, I mean, describe what would happen once you achieve these targeted sanctions. And I'd like the other folks in the panel to, comment on that.
Thank you.
First of all, that's a huge debate. And I grant you that you can't say the success of sanctions will always be preordained. We have learned that in many examples that they have not worked. But there are also good examples. There are examples where they did work. Libya comes to mind. I could give you also other examples. And we have to take a look at what were conditions for success. Now, first of all, they have to be targeted. They have to be directed. For instance, you see, part of my family comes from the east of Germany. And they lived in the GDR, and I, as a kid, could visit them. And they hated all sanctions which prevented them from buying bananas or oranges or whatever. They loved the sanctions against the Ulbrichts and Honeckers and whatsoever. So, first thing, they have to be targeted, and I believe the target, nuclear, armaments, Revolutionary Guards, are the correct ones. First thing. Second, I think there have to be sanctions which are agreed upon by the world community. That means at least there have to be, we need a Security Council resolution. I know that some countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Brazil are still hesitating, but I believe that we need that, and I believe that there is a good chance that the Russians and also the Chinese will let this Security Council resolution pass. So we need to stay united, because if we're not united, we experienced that in the years before, in those board meetings of the Board of Governors of the IAEA, when we had to talk to the other non-aligned countries. And we immediately realized when we, the six, were not united, the Iranians loved it, and the non-aligned, they all said, okay, we go with the Iranians. So we have to be united. Now, when those who say, you didn't say it, but some say, if we get a Security Council resolution, it will not be strict enough. I don't think so. First of all, I think we will get these three things. And then there's always the possibility to do what we did in 2008, when we had a previous set of sanctions, that you could interpret that very widely. And I think the United States and the European Union would do exactly that. We would interpret that widely, and we would have de facto even stronger sanctions from the United States and the EU. Now, how it always then works in detail is very difficult to predict. I think we still today, we don't know why sanctions in Libya worked. We don't know exactly what made the last white government in South Africa reconsider. their position. I think this will be for historians to find out. We can only try to do our best. I believe that if we meet these conditions, which I just set out, I think we have a chance.
Thank you. Shahram?
You don't.
All right.
You see, I can't predict it. I don't know. I don't live in Iran. I can't tell you if now... You see, the thing is that you hurt the Revolutionary Guards. You hurt those people who are behind the nuclear program. They don't get their material for the nuclear program. They don't get the material for their weapons. So that is bound to hurt them.
Let me try and reinforce what the ambassador is saying, slightly differently, but it's exactly the same point. First of all, originally the idea was to increase the debate amongst the elite, to reconsider the course that they've adopted. Now, if you don't impose a cost on them, they're not going to start debating. I'm not suggesting that overnight the Revolutionary Guards will go to Khamenei and say, look, it's becoming too difficult for us. Let's change our course on the nuclear program. But at the very least, you will be empowering the people who want a more reasonable course to make their case that going down this road is going to cost us. And the sanctions show that. Okay, that's one. Secondly, you will delay, as the ambassador just said, the program. You make it harder for them to get equipment and materials. So you're imposing another cost on them, all right? And thirdly, the NPT is a global regime. There are 190 countries in it. There's no enforcement mechanism for the NPT. If the Security Council +1, the P5 +1, decide that some country is non-compliant, at least in regards to safeguards and in other respects, and does nothing about it, what sort of signal does that send to other potential proliferators? So I just don't see it. And I think that the problem is that there's so many analogies with Saddam Hussein and the babies and the problem of milk and all the rest of it that happened. Iran is not Iraq. That is, the regime cannot build palaces and let the people suffer. So targeted sanctions and sanctions will generate discontent, or at least debate, amongst the elite and discontent amongst the population, but it won't be against the West. It will be against, if it's targeted properly, against the regime. And I think that that's an opportunity.
Yeah. Yes, first I would like to come back about what Ambassador said about what was done in October 2003. It was, in my point of view, one of the major diplomatic victory of the European Union in history. Fischer, Stroh and Villepin arrived in the morning in Tehran, and when they left at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was done. It was an amazing diplomatic success. Why? It was engagement. They respect Iran. They said, we don't agree on all fields, but we respect you. 3 Ministry of Foreign Affairs are coming and discussing directly with you. And the success was evident, was obvious. The only problem, Mr. Ambassador, you said in 2005 things have changed because the Islamic regime has changed. No, I'm sorry. But the failure came before, because this agreement was not agreed by the US. And so the Europeans were quite alone. What the European Union proposed to the Iranians was accepted by Iranians. But without the approval, the active approval of the US, such promises are useless. And so the last act of Khatami was to resume enrichment. It was Khatami's decision, not Ahmadinejad one. And so the union between Europe and US is a very, very important thing, especially in sanctions. And I go back to the sanctions. I do agree with you, Mr. Ambassador, about targeted sanctions. And when I was speaking about lifting the sanctions, I mean that today 90% of the sanctions are economic global sanctions. You said when Siemens or Volkswagen is not working in Iran, they are not targeted sanctions. They are sanctions against the people. Right. They cannot have work. So we have at the same time to have targeted sanctions on the nuclear issue, on the military actions, on the military people on one side of the regime, as you said, on the Honeckers and these people on one side. But we have to withdraw the sanction, to lift the sanction on other items. And what the State Department did about Internet, for instance, is a very good starting point. What President Obama said in this speech of Nowruz, secondly about Tehran reactor And third, about internet, there are two steps to withdrawal of sanctions in one way or the other, and we have to go on in this way. Of course, it has to be done in a strategic way, so that in one side we can have the people much more involved in international relations and having the capacity of working with foreigners in Iran. It will be very positive. It's not our job to change the regime in Iran. It will be a new balance of power, and at least not to put a burden on the Democrats in Iran. That's not our duty. But on the other side, to have targeted sanctions about human rights, about what people are doing. A last point about the Pasdaran, and maybe we shall be back on the Revolutionary Guards. They are very divided. And Pasdaran, when you speak about the Pasdaran, is there the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, Islamic Republic Revolutionary Guard Corps, 140,000 people, soldiers devoted to the regime on one side, and about 2 million of veterans of the Pasdaran, who were Pasdaran when they were young, now they are retired from the Pasdaran, but still involved in the same network. And so in the future of Iran, most of the people, in my opinion, able to take the power are former Pasdaran. You have got in the US, for instance, Mr. Sazegara is one of the founders of the Pasdaran. He is here seeking political asylum in the US. And there are tens or hundreds of Sazegaras in Iran. So if you are putting sanctions on the Pasdaran as a whole, you will put sanctions on people who are maybe the only people able to take the power in Iran and the first step after the current system. So we have to discuss and to be very precise about the targeted sanction, but I do agree on targeted sanction on one side, but it will be useful if at the same time we are lifting sanctions on other items, and both at the same time inside a global policy which has to be implemented with Iran, with EU, US, China, Russia, and other countries, and the emerging states, of course.
Thank you. Let's go to the lady right there. Yep, and then we'll go to...
I'm Sally McNamara from the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned how pressure internally is what brought down the Berlin Wall in Central and Eastern Europe. Well, I can think of at least 3 figures who had something to do with that, and that's Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and the Pope. I think it would be foolish to think that the Berlin Wall fell just because of internal pressure. I think external pressure had something to do with it as well. My question is with regard to EU policy. A couple of years ago, I asked a very, very naive question of an EU official and said, hasn't the EU completely failed over Iran because they're far closer to a nuclear weapon now than they were when we started this process? And they said, don't be so stupid. 2 things happened which were a giant success. Number 1, the Iranians showed up. And number 2, we stopped the Americans from taking action. Now, this was the parameter of success, not to stop Iran getting to be a nuclear power, which seems to me we're on completely the different wavelength. My question is, what do you think the US and European reaction will be if the Israelis take action against Iran? If this is genuinely an existential threat to Israel, which I actually think it is, they will take the less worse option, which surely will be military strikes. And my very final question is to Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned how we should support targeted sanctions against Iran. Which one of the 5,000 German companies doing business in Iran do you think are going to pull out of doing business with them?
These were several questions.
Quite a few questions, yeah. First of all, to your first comment, not a question, we were very appreciative of the fact when Ronald Reagan came to the Berlin-Brandenburg Gate in 1987 and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear this wall down. Mr. Gorbachev opened this gate. And we believe that that, of course, was part of the equation. But I disagree with you when you say it was just, so to speak, the build-up that contributes to that. I think if you talk to people in Eastern Europe, and if you also talk, for instance, to Gorbachev and others, you will find out that really an essential role was also played by the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, which not only allowed the opposition to organize, and they now suddenly had a right to organize, it also allowed Western journalists to report freely from all those Eastern countries, and that made all the difference. In 1953, when 1 million East Germans took to the street all over the GDR, none of us knew about it. We knew about Berlin. We did not know that there were, in each GDR city, in each East German city, there were huge demonstrations. There were Soviet tanks. We didn't know about it. And therefore, people couldn't act on it. And that made all the difference in 1989, that we had journalists who could report on it. And they knew that there were demonstrations in Leipzig, and there were 30,000 and 50,000 and then 300,000 people gathering. And the word spread, and that brought the peaceful revolution together, which brought the Berlin Wall down. Now, on no success with Iran, I would slightly differ. I would say, first of all, for 2 years we were successful. For 2 years they did suspend all these things. We had the monitors in. We still have some of the monitors in. We didn't have before. So we have a much better information than we had before, and we certainly have slowed down the process, at least during the first 2 years. Now, I believe there is, as we discussed before, there is no alternative to a common front of the EU and the US. On military action, I do not believe that this would solve the problem, because I think, first of all, I don't know of anyone who tells me with confidence that one could take out the whole nuclear program. And second, I think it would make all our efforts in the region to get, for instance, agreement on the Israel-Palestine question, on all the other issues, it would make almost impossible. So I'm very skeptical on that. And on the question of the German companies, I have to tell you that quite a few did pull out, like, for instance, Siemens and Deutsche Bank and Commerzbank. They all said they will in the future do no more business there. As I said, Volkswagen will not build the plant there. And our trade has gone down, and which is, you might say, Bernard will probably say, might not be a good thing, but it is a fact. And as I said, we have cut our export credit guarantees by 97%, and that's the figure. And I think this is not true for other countries. I mean, your export has grown, of course, from a very low level, but I think it's not quite true that we have not taken action here.
Thank you. Shahram, Bernard, would you like to comment on any of those issues? Okay, we'll go right there.
My name's Mike Inglis. I'm from Georgetown University, a graduate student in public policy. I just got a question about U.S. policy. You think it's going better? Do you see a reversal with the Secretary Gates coming out and saying sanctions are the only thing that are going to work, and then Secretary Kling coming out and saying this is going to turn into a military dictatorship? Do you see Obama going backwards, and it's not a main effort? Also, in making sanctions work, it has to be a tight. There can't be floods out, which there are. And do you think you guys will be able to do it? The other countries like Russia and China, and also with Russia selling weapons to Iran, anti-aircraft weapons, is that able to work? Another question is,
well, why don't we just leave it at a couple of questions?
Okay. Can I just throw one more? Is there any role of NATO playing in a part, especially with missile defense in there? Because that seems like that's coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody like to take up
US policy?
Shahram?
Well, I mean, there are a whole series of problems. As you say, you've got to get the Russians on board. You've got to make sure that the Europeans do it. But if I may say so, for the previous question, you also have to make sure the Americans do it. From what came out over the weekend, it seems that billions of dollars have gone to companies that are trading with Iran. So it's not easy. NATO doesn't have a role, I don't think, but NATO has extended its periphery and has some sort of some sort of role, whether this, but I think that the stationing of anti-missiles is going to be in the Gulf mainly, maybe in this on sea and on land around there. I don't know whether Eastern Europe or the Baltic states or whoever is going to be, whoever the current contenders are in Eastern Europe. But they are NATO members, and I assume that most of them are willing to do so. But it doesn't seem to me that's an immediate thing. The immediate thing is the policy is the U.S. policy right now is to try and get sanctions to prevent an attack, to buy time, to see if engagement works, still see if engagement works, and persist in that, and then to plan against the possibility that Iran reaches the threshold, whatever we mean by threshold, and that's technically and politically an open question. At what point you can no longer really stop them, and prepare in the region for the eventuality of having security assurances, guarantees, and layers of missile defense, and to try and neutralize them. Now, it's not just if they get it, it's also to show them while they're developing that you're going to make it, you're going to neutralize or weaken the value of that particular, going down that road. And it has to do it all at once. It doesn't mean that you conceded the fact that Iran is going to go there, but you have to plan for that because there are lead times. I mean, I think this administration has done extraordinarily well. In light of the fact that this country is so divided, I mean, the partisanship is so, I mean, it's grotesque. For a foreigner here, I've been here 3 months. I'm horrified by the, you know, the substantial agreement on Iraq and Afghanistan, some niggling here and there. But on Iran, the administration is being provoked to do something within 1 year, after the previous one was pretty competent for 8 years. And as Bernard says, that I think that the tone has been exactly right in terms of offering to engage and trying to engage and so on. So, you know, there are a whole host of problems for graduate students and practitioners.
Yeah. Thank you. This lady in the brown jacket here.
Thank you. This is Tulin Dalolu with Haberturk. It's a daily newspaper in Turkey. I'd like to ask a question to the ambassador. You talked about as to why it is important to have Germany at the table while negotiating with Iran. Since 2005, especially since 2005, the Turkish leadership expressed disappointment that they are not also given a seat at the table because they believe that they could make a difference. Now we do see that they are trying to, as they put it, to keep the channel, communication channel open with the Iranian regime. You know the whole story, so I'm not going to give you a rundown on it, but I just want to hear your perspective as to how you see the Turkish role in this, how significant it is, and how integrated their efforts are with the EU3 at least. Thank you.
Thank you.
You see, you always have to have the balance between keeping the team small enough so they can really act as a team and be in the room. And we heard something about from Mara Ratman today at lunch about Mideast. And then, of course, of others playing very useful roles. I really believe that Turkey is playing a very useful role here. They have made very good proposals, and they have been very supportive of what the E3+3 have been doing. So I have nothing but praise for them. I think they did a good thing, and I'm pretty confident that they will continue to do so.
Yep, Bernard?
Yes, I think that it is very important to have a look at these newcomers, about the non-aligned countries. Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, India. India is too big, maybe. Indonesia. This more medium-scale new country, Iran is among this country. And I think now it is quite important as a new track 2, track 3, track 4 way to use this country. They are opposed to Iranian policies, that's clear. Brazil, President Lula is 100% against the Iranian policy and ideology, but he's supporting Iran in its way for independence, for having its own policy. And so I think now it would be useful to work with these people. Of course, I do agree, Mr. Ambassador, with the fact that we cannot work with 25 people together, but to find a way to get help from this country and to show up that what the EU 3+3 or P5+1 is doing is not the club of the country who have got nuclear weapons against the others, but if other countries are in the theater, it will be something very important. It's a way to show up that Iran is respected as a country, and I think it's very important.
Can I say just one thing on Turkey? Turkey's utility would be, it would seem to me, particularly that since Iran and Israel don't have a strategic dialogue to communicate between the two, each side's perceptions of the issues, I think the Iranians misjudge the seriousness with which the Israelis take it and poo-poo it, and I think that that's where the risk lies. I agree entirely about the idea that they're non-aligned, but you know, India, South Africa and others have tried in the IAEA to prevail on the Iranians. And I think that comes back to the ambassador's point, which is that, and incidentally, I don't think Brazil is particularly supportive of Iran's independence. Brazil is enriching, and nobody's talking about enrichment in Brazil. And they want to make sure that they're insulated from criticism by allowing the Iranians to take the front. But I do think that what the ambassador said is very critical, which is that to the extent that one can get support, and this was first raised by both Bush at the NDU in 2004 and by Baraday in various times, about the multilateralization of the fuel cycle, especially for future enrichers and so on. Because any agreement, any technical agreement with the Iranians will have to be within a matrix that doesn't discriminate against them. If you can sell it as the sort of a new norm within which the Iranians are just the first actors, that may be easier to digest.
Thank you. Gentleman in the center there with the dark blue jacket there. Yeah.
Thank you. Doron Zimmerman, I'm with National Defense University. I very much agree with the point that Shahram just made about the risk being in not understanding the Israeli position fully. Now, Lieutenant General Gabi Ashkenazi is here today, and I don't think his message to Mr. Gates is, we'll just wait, whatever the cost. So do you think that smart sanctions are going to have an impact fast enough to obviate an Israeli option? Thanks.
I think Israel is very happy with that approach. That's what we consistently hear. I think they agree with this approach on targeted sanctions. And let me reiterate once again, sanctions always need some time. They don't work overnight. And that, I think, is a key thing to keep in mind.
Avner, was this right on this point, or otherwise? Well, then let me put you in the queue. Then we have the gentleman up front here.
Maybe this will link in with what Avner was going to ask. In this very rich discussion,
could you please?
Sorry, Andrew Pierre, now Georgetown University. In this very rich discussion, I don't think we really fleshed out too much the Israeli aspect of it and how it interlinks with the United States. I think Shahram already knew this, but in his 3 months here, he had reinforced the deep split within the United States. But if one sort of looks 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years ahead, there is certainly some possibility that Israel decides to take an action which is very controversial within the United States. And then the question is, what does this do to the European-American relationship? So my question basically is targeted on, is there a risk in this set of issues and problems that we run into a new, call it a European-American crisis of views like we did during the Iraq War, in which there's a fundamental difference of views between a U.S. policy which accommodates to some extent, let's call it the Israeli hawks, and the Europeans, who basically, I think, would sort of side with the Israeli doves, although there aren't many of them left.
Yeah. The question about Iran is that everybody has got his own idea, and we have got as many answers that we have, as many people in the room. And we are speaking too much, I think, about Israel. Israel is an important issue, of course, for the Iranians, but not so much, I think. And I think that Israel is overestimated. And as a whole, Iran is overestimated, the power of Iran. We see the hand of Iran everywhere. Something is happening, Iran is behind. No. On 9/11, it was not Iran behind. And so let's be cautious. About Israel, I met some very tough people from Israeli think tanks a few weeks ago, and they told me last year, if nothing is done before December 2009, we shall do by ourselves something, you will see. And now nothing happened in last December, as they told me. If nothing is done before next winter, 2010, you will see that you will see. It means that they are not crazy people. And in Israel, the debate on Iran is strong as it is in the US, in France, everywhere. And now, of course, after 30 years of difficulties, of failure, of success, of half success and so on, people are tired. A new generation of people have come to power. And this new generation of people below 40 years old, 45 years old, who have known only the new regime, they are new people. So we know, everybody knows that we have to think different. That's the reason why I was a little bit provocative a month ago. But about Israel, I think that what Ehud Barak said recently was very important, and the debate is in such a thing in Israel. They said recently, Iran is a major strategic danger for Israel, number one. Now Barak said, no. The number one strategic danger problem for Israel is not nuclear issue from Iran. It is not terrorism. It is a Palestinian problem which is not solved. So, of course, the nuclear Iranian program is important, of course. Of course, terrorism is important. Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on is important. But the main problem is the Palestinian issue. So we have to put the Iranian bomb in a framework, a more global system. And in this point of view, I don't think that Israeli problem is so important, in my opinion. When Israelis are doing things, they are doing it, and they give the information the morning after, not before.
I just think one thing that there's a lot of bluff going on here, as Bernard was implying, that unless you put the military option somewhere close by, that the diplomacy and the sanctions, which after all hurt the sanctioning countries too, won't be implemented. I mean, one of the major incentives is for the United States to say to the Europeans, look, if we don't get moving on this thing, these characters might do something crazy. So there's a certain amount of bluff. But I understand the Israeli concern. It's not just bluff. I think that your point is important, but I think that the key thing is, as long as the Europeans and the Americans, as long as P5+1 and plus others, stay on the same page, stay in contact with each other, and make sure that diplomacy is given a chance, if by some untoward event happens at some point down the line, for whatever reason, at least the Europeans and the Americans will have given diplomacy 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, whatever it is that they've done. It's nearly 7.5 years now. So that Iran, I think, will not be able to play the victim if this diplomacy continues, because that's really important, that the Europeans and the Americans don't get divided on this issue.
Thank you. Garrett?
Thank you. Garrett Martin from the European Institute in Washington. Just a quick question, because obviously the nuclear program and the domestic opposition have become intertwined since last year, but this may be a naive question, and please correct me if I'm completely off the mark, but it seems to me that there is consensus amongst, even amongst the opposition, about the nuclear program. Mm-hmm. So let's take even the optimistic scenario that there is a regime change and that the regime is more palatable. It's quite possible that they would want to continue the current nuclear program. So what happens in this case? Is it a case where basically it's the people in charge we dislike and the fact that they may have their hands on the nuclear button, or is it the fact in absolute terms of having a nuclear program?
No, I mean, let's get this quite clear. because this is an illusion that's propagated by lots of people, that the Iranians all agree on the nuclear program. What nuclear program? What are we talking about? Of course all Iranians accept that people shouldn't dictate to them their right to technology under the NPT. The issue isn't that. Even enrichment, yes, perhaps Iran does have a right, though there's no such phrasing. It has a right to technology, peaceful technology, not a right to enrichment. I don't think you get many Iranians, and most Iranians are nationalists, who say that somebody from outside can tell us what we can and can't have. That's clear. But on the specific program, there was a difference, and there is a difference between Ahmadinejad's race, as far as one can see, toward enrichment, and others who think that Iran should adopt a policy of building confidence with the international community, that its intentions are peaceful. Now, there's a world of a difference between those two. I mean, the three presidential candidates, Karoubi, Rezai, and Mousavi, all in their presidential debates before the June elections, said Mr. Ahmadinejad's policies are confrontational, provocative, and unnecessary. And they all came up with different versions. One talked about an international consortium. Another talked about resuming contacts with the Europeans for diplomacy, so Larijani, Solana type thing, and so on. So they're very different. There's no agreement on the priority to be accorded enrichment. There's none on the price to be paid for enrichment. And certainly there's none about Iran having a right to enrichment that goes so close that it's indistinguishable from a weapons capability. Those are issues that have never been debated. And it's one of the reasons why this regime, and I mean Ahmadinejad, have pushed this issue, tried to make it a populist issue by going around, factionalizing it, talking about the nuclear program as a train without brakes, because they don't want to debate about it. They've had press directives given that you cannot depict anything about the nuclear program other than it being a conspiracy against our rights. I mean, why, if you think that this is a popular program, do you go through all of this? Why do you put one of the former negotiators in jail? He's now out and he's in the United States. Why do you put him in jail if he simply points out that this course will lead you to confrontation with the Security Council? So this notion that the Iranians all support a nuclear program, yes, but not this one.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Let me underline from my experience that what you just said, Shahram, is 100% true. There are worlds between the different kinds of things Iranians understand when they talk about the nuclear program. Worlds apart. And let me stress one other factor. Ahmadinejad and the people around him, they thrive on antagonism. They know he was elected first with just 19.5% of the popular vote, 19.5%. And so he believes the only way he could become really popular is when he takes on the West and when he creates a confrontation which is just that's his trademark. And he and his people, his faction, they want confrontation. And I can tell you, with them, we won't get an agreement. Well, that's the bad part of the story. The good part of the story is, as Bernard said earlier, there is no decision made by the president. All the decisions in Iran are at the end made by the religious leader. So that is one faction. Ahmadinejad wants to get a following by confronting the West, and he won't change that. But there are others who, unfortunately, right now, not in positions of power, who have a totally different understanding of the nuclear problem. They want a certain status effect. They want to modernize the country. They would like to just be able to say, oh, we could do that if the price is right. I think I can firmly say so. I think in the spring of 2005, we were very close to a second package which would have done the deal. And unfortunately, for reasons which I can't discuss here, we didn't get there. But we were very, very close. And there are leaders in Iran who would be willing to make a compromise with us.
Thank you. We're fast running out of time, so let me collect some questions and then we can have the panelists respond. The gentleman in the blue tie on the right there.
Thank you very much. I'm Najm Meshkati. I'm a professor of engineering at the University of Southern California. One of the areas of my research is risk analysis, human error, and technological accident. I want to follow up on the sanction question by gentleman from Nation magazine. And I will point the question to Ambassador Scharioth for your excellent remarks. Has there been any risk analysis of a runaway reaction or an unintended
On what action?
runaway reaction or unintended consequences of sanction by pushing Iran to withdraw from NPT? Because there is a very healthy debate going on as we speak in Iran, some very well-written, persuasive editorials by Mr. Shariat Madari and others in Kayhan newspaper about what do we get out from NPT and IAEA. Would you think that there is no residual risk or some unintended consequences of this new round of sanction to push Iran over the cliff by withdrawal from NPT?
Okay, please hold your answer. We'll go to Avner Cohen right next to you.
Well, I'll try to be very brief. And it's in particular to Bernard, and to some extent in agreement with the ambassador. And I'm speaking right now as I'm both American and Israeli, but for this purpose I'm Israeli on the left side, Israeli who criticize in public the current Netanyahu government policy on Iran. But I want to mention one thing. You advocate, Mr. Bernard, so much the engagement with Iran and the whole business about the race between the bomb and democracy and so forth. There is one issue which makes the whole divide between Israel and Iran very, very pronounced and very, very prominent for essentially all Israelis. And this is the whole business about Holocaust denial and the very denial of the very legitimacy of the state of Israel. Regardless of the Palestinian issue, regardless of the all conflict, but the very denial of legitimacy of the state. And as long as you accept Ahmadinejad as the representative of Iran with that kind of language and that kind of discourse, you will have a problem with Israel, and not just with Mr. Netanyahu, but with most of Israel. And that has to be addressed, because you cannot give legitimacy to a leader, a world leader, that continue with that kind of line of discourse. It's very difficult to normalize it, to engage, when a leader continues with that kind of line.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in the back, yes.
Greg Thielman, Arms Control Association. I wanted to take off on a point raised by Mr. Chubin about Brazil and Brazil's enrichment program. It seems to me that Lula's position in sympathy with Ahmadinejad is giving great aid and comfort to the efforts of Ahmadinejad to distort what this discussion is all about. And one would think that Brazil, since Brazil does play by the rules in terms of honoring its own safeguards agreement with the IAEA, that it would want to show that itself is different than Iran, that does not play by the rules. And Brazil eliminated its nuclear weapons program. Iran is not willing to be transparent enough to demonstrate that it has as well. So I guess this, the question is why is Brazil playing it this way, and what can Ambassador Scharioth tell us about the German dialogue with Brazil, since German-Brazilian cooperation in the 70s damaged Germany's relations with the U.S. and Brazil's relations with the U.S. at the time. So you would think Germany would have some particular credibility with the Brazilians on the independence point and the right to enrich.
Okay, why don't we go with these three questions, and we'll see if we've got time for another round. Bernard, would you like to...
Yes, about Holocaust and the policy and the discourses in Iran. It's clear, that's a matter of fact. Ahmadinejad is porte-parole of a lot of people thinking that Israel is not a legitimate state and so on and so forth, and is quite popular in the Arab streets, as we said in France. That's a matter of fact. And I do understand the problem. But it is one of the issues about Iran. It's of course a difficult problem, the problem of Iran and the Jewish problem of the Holocaust and Israel. It's a big issue, but there are a lot of other big issues dealing with the nuclear program of Iran. So of course I do agree with you with the difficulties it is, and I understand that dealing with Ahmadinejad is quite impossible today, but Ahmadinejad has a 4 years mandate. He has 3 years more to do, and that's all I can say. About engagement, yes, I do think that engagement is the only way, efficient and rapid, to find a solution and to find a way to find in Iran, in one way or the other, a group of people taking a good decision concerning the nuclear issue, which is not a matter of consensus. It is consensus on 50%, but on 50% it's not at all a consensus. And people now in Iran, they don't want Ahmadinejad to instrumentalize the nuclear issue around him, to support him. It was the case 5 years ago. Everybody was supporting Ahmadinejad or anybody else on the nuclear issue. It's no longer the case today. When Ahmadinejad said before the last February anniversary of revolution that we shall enrich uranium 20%, he was waiting for a huge demonstration supporting him. Nothing happened, because in Iran people are not happy at all with such a policy. And so the nuclear issue is dividing people in Iran today.
Thank you. I think, Ambassador Scharioth, the question about risk analysis, particularly with regard to the new type of sanctions.
Yeah, to give a short answer already, I do not believe that the risk is very high that they would leave the NPT. I would not guarantee that if Ahmadinejad had his say, that this would be the same answer I would give you. But I do believe, as I said before, that in Iran the important decisions are made by the religious leader. That's our analysis. And the religious leader has not the slightest interest in doing that. Why not? First of all, he stresses all the time that the use of nuclear weapons, and actually nuclear weapons, he says, are against Islam. And they are against the Quran. You should not do that. And I think he would lose some of his narrative if he would do that. Second, I think it would damage the standing of Iran with the non-aligned significantly. You see, as you have pointed out, 190 countries are party to the NPT. This is the worldwide country. This is the worldwide treaty. Everybody is in agreement. Very few treaties we have which are really worldwide. We have 192 countries and 190 are members. So if they would withdraw, that would damage their standing significantly. And they have always played in the meetings of the Board of Governors of the IAEA, trying to convince others to split the rest of the world, to get the Brazils, the Argentinas, the Indonesias, the Turkeys, the Indias away from us. That has been their game. And never were they more disappointed when those countries voted with us, with the Western countries. So my answer is, in all probability, no. One just word to the Brazil question. We have made, as you are absolutely right, we have consistently told the Brazilians, and they listen very carefully, that countries like Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Germany are in a separate category, because we have all volunteered not to go for nuclear weapons. And therefore we have a special responsibility. You know, it's something which gives us the responsibility also to make the case towards Iran. And I think they fully understand that. And of course, this is also true for those three countries who have had nuclear weapons and have now dismantled them and had forgone them: Ukraine, Kazakhstan and Belarus. So there are examples of countries which have given up nuclear weapons once they had them.
Thank you. Shahram?
Well, just very briefly on, they've often threatened, Shahram Madari particularly, the less you know about the NPT, the more you disdain it. Iran gets technology, gets assistance. gets, up until last autumn, it was getting money from the IAEA for some of it. What? All right. Now, you can be sure, it may not be getting anything anymore, but you can be sure if you leave the treaty, you certainly will get nothing. So whatever happens to those dozen reactors you want to build, who's going to build them? And with what technology? So, you know, that's one consideration. The other is, of course, that the Iranians like to play the victim within the treaty rather than to break out of the treaty. But I do think that an attack on Iran risks them leaving the treaty, and therefore blinding us completely. I mean, the inspections will close down, that would be it. And that's a risk. On why Brazil does what it does, I have no idea. The ambassador gave you a rationale why they shouldn't. I suppose there may be mileage in saying no to the United States. Political mileage, and Lula fancies himself as some sort of populist leader.
I think the gentleman here had a question and is patiently waiting, so we'll take you, and it's the last question.
Great, thanks very much. Christopher Chivis, Rand Corporation. Say we look a couple of years down the road into a situation in which Iran has succeeded in obtaining the capability to build a bomb, perhaps even has done so. What, in your view, would be the appropriate transatlantic policy response to that development?
You see, I firmly believe that we will not get there. And maybe I should elaborate on a point which I made in my opening remarks and which was supported, I understand, by Shahram. And that is, in my view, the essential question of the next 5-10 years. And that is, will we succeed in multilateralizing the fuel cycle? I think this is the key question. Because all the proposals which got us closer to a result with Iran had to do with things like that. I think that is really, in my experience, the most promising road. And as Shahram, I think, rightly said, we need to find a way which does not put Iran in a different position than others. They shouldn't lose face. And that, I think, is very, very important. It's always important in international diplomacy, but I think in that region it's even more important. And therefore, I think we should go back to those proposals, and you might know that Germany has made a proposal, and the IAEA has made a proposal, and Russia has made a proposal. So there are 3 proposals on the table. I think all of them interesting, easily maybe to be combined. But I do believe that if we want to find a response for the future, it has to be there. It has to be in finding a device to multilateralize the fuel cycle. And you see, again, let me say this is not something totally unusual. For instance, the Netherlands and Germany already do it together, and we do it mostly not in our country. And so there's not necessarily a loss of status in that. So I think there is a solution possible on the basis of multilateralizing the fuel cycle. But we need to do more work. We need to find out how to proceed on that. And again, the discussion inside Iran for 4 weeks about the Tehran research reactor, I think, confirmed all what I said. They were really tempted. They were really fascinated by the proposal and, in a way, interested. So I'm quite optimistic that we can find a solution if we put the right proposal on the table.
Thank you. Thank you so much for 3 extremely rich presentations. Thank you for your questions and comments. I think this was an extremely good panel. This concludes this session. This concludes the 2010 Ahtisaari Symposium, European Security in Global Perspective. We appreciate President Ahtisaari's presence and contribution, and that of our Finnish friends and sponsors. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.